Welcome, everyone, to the Ready for the Draft podcast. I am your host, Gregg Schutze. This is episode 18 of the 2024 podcast series, where we take a look at the draft-eligible prospects and get you ready for the NFL draft. And this week, last week in February, is NFL Combine week. I think the Combine has always been something that I've really looked forward to. I've been covering the NFL draft for 24 years. Put together my first mock draft when I was a student at USC, really tasked with the story to take a look at the USC prospects who would be taken in that draft, and RJ Soward, Travis Claridge, Wendell Hayes, Chad Morton, David Gibson, all coming off the board that year. Also put together my first round mock draft, and the rest was history. I fell in love with the process, evaluating talent, studying the draft, understanding trends, positional value, studying not only the players but then also the teams, the team needs, what's the best positional fit for each of these teams, who are the guys that are going to come off the board when, first, second, third day, priority free agents. It's a lot of fun, and this is just one piece of the puzzle. And I'll tell you what, it's becoming a prime time event. I think when I first started taking a look at the Combine and such, I remember USC's Pro Day, my last year at USC, when I watched Travis Claridge run a sub 540, watched Chad Morton blaze the track there. That was at USC's track where they ran the 40, and then they went out to Howard Jones Field to ultimately do a lot of the drills. And it was one of those things to where it was open to the public, and we were able to come out and watch. Got to watch a lot of my friends run, and not as big nearly as it is today. You know, we see that, you know, there are a lot of publications and a lot of news outlets, you know, broadcasting the Combine, or I'm sorry, the Pro Days live, but the Combine itself is something that really has kind of taken on a life of its own. And I talk about that because this Combine is going to start on Thursday, February 29th. It used to be quarterbacks would get the first crack on the field. Really, I think, you know, you'd have the running backs and offensive linemen, but then you'd also have the quarterbacks, receivers, and running backs. We're going defense to start. February 29th, we're talking about the defensive linemen and the linebackers. And then on Friday, March 1st, we're going to be seeing the defensive backs and tight ends. Then you get into Saturday, really that prime time coverage of the Combine. That's where you're going to get to see the quarterbacks, the receivers, the running backs, and then finally on Sunday, March 2nd, the big guys in the trenches, the offensive linemen will get to have their day. I think the specialists as well, the kickers, the punters, they'll also get to perform there on that Sunday. So it's kind of flipping things on its head a little bit, you know, yet again, with looking at the defense first. Now, we've got 320 players who will be working out at the Combine, or at least we're invited to the Combine. Not everyone's going to work out. I think you've already heard that Caleb Williams, the front runner to be the number one overall pick, and the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, Jaden Daniels, they've both decided that they are not going to be working out. They're not going to be throwing at the Combine. Marvin Harrison Jr. has said, I'm not even working out at all, whether it's at the Combine or my Pro Day. I'm just going to get ready for my rookie season. And but again, 320 total players, 146 on defense. That means 168 on offense plus the 6 on special teams. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at as many of those 146 defensive players, along with some snubs. You know, I think they did a pretty good job inviting a lot of the big players in the NFL draft, but I think there were some guys that were left out, and we'll cover them as well. So I think really what we got to do is there's a lot to cover in a short amount of time, so let's go ahead and jump right into things. And I think really on Thursday, the very first thing that I'm going to be looking forward to is going to be seeing Laiatu, and Jared Verse. These two guys are the premier edge rushers, along with Dallas Turner, who's going to be working out with the linebackers, by the way. So you're going to see him drop a little bit more into coverage. I think that's a smart strategy. He was actually an outside linebacker edge rusher specialist there for Bama. So Latu, he's played with his hand in the dirt. He's played as a stand-up edge rusher, but he's going to be working out there with a defensive lineman. And when I look at a guy like Latu, to me, this guy is the best pure pass rusher in this year's draft, hands down. 16 sacks, 36 hurries, but then that win rate. Come on, 26.2% win rate for this guy as well. He's absolutely explosive coming off the edge. We're going to get to see that first step quickness. You talk about guys running 40 times, but look, these guys, it's that 10-yard split, because at the end of the day, it's that first 10 yards. He's not having to run a full 40 to get into the backfield, but you're going to see some power in his hands. That's one of the things. You're going to see the power, you're going to see his technique, you're going to see his ability to bend. People say that he's not all that bendy. I think you'll see some of that. You'll see the ankle flexion. You'll see his ability to rip coming off the edge, and I love the way that he does this. He'll rip and kind of hug that arm of that offensive lineman. That kind of helps slingshot him around, flattens out, gives him that soft edge, and then gets straight to the quarterback in a hurry. To me, Latu, best pass rusher. The biggest thing, though, isn't even going to be his workout. It's going to ultimately be the medicals. Why? Well, I think about a guy like Miles Jack. When Miles Jack was coming out of UCLA, he was seen as a bona fide top 10 pick. But he had the knee injury that not only, the knee, but then you're talking about degenerative issues with that knee. He fell all the way to the second round. Now, I'm not saying that Latu is necessarily going to fall all the way to round 2, but look, here's the thing. Head and neck injuries are very serious. It's serious enough for him that Washington's doctors ultimately said, Latu, you're retiring. He was able to find an independent doctor. He was able to find, and then UCLA's doctor also cleared him, and he's been injury-free pretty much there in his 2 years there at UCLA. So with Latu, I think the medicals are going to be huge. When I look at teams that are looking for defensive players, there's so many guys on offense, right? The quarterbacks, the receivers, the offensive linemen. I think, especially if we end up seeing as many as 4 or 5 quarterbacks potentially taken in the round in round number 1. I'm sorry, in the top 10, potentially even. If you're talking about Chicago potentially trading down with somebody who's looking to trade up into that top 10 to get another quarterback, you could see some of these defensive players slide down the board. But I really think it starts at 8 with Atlanta if they don't go quarterback. Then obviously the Bears at 9 if they decide that they want to go with an edge rusher, to pair with Montez Sweat. After that, then you got the Vikings. What's happening with Danielle Hunter? You need to figure out what's going on there. Show up the edge. I think the Broncos. Again, what's the deal with Russell Wilson? If they decide to go defense, they need another edge rusher, and I think that's one of the things that the Broncos could be on the market for. Heck, the Raiders. I know that they just picked up Tyree Wilson, but Max Crosby still needs a running mate. And then, obviously, I don't think he gets past 14 with the Saints. Saints are going to definitely need some pass rush help as well. So if it's not Latu, then it's definitely Jared Verse putting on the show. Another guy, look, 62 total pressures, much like Latu. The win rate, 21.8, so it's not quite as high as Latu. But look, here's the thing. We know how explosive he is. This was a guy that was playing on the offensive side of the football at Albany. COVID hits. He decides he's going to bulk up. Ends up becoming a beast of a pass rusher there. And then ultimately moves to Florida State. Back-to-back years with 9 sacks. People were talking about, well, he didn't have the best year in 2023. I think that's BS. I think this is a guy that continued to show that he can win in a lot of ways. He uses those long arms to his advantage. He's able to extend, keep that distance. You see the speed to power, bull rush, driving guys into the backfield. He's going to work outside. He's going to come back inside. Does a great job setting the edge against the run as well. I look at Jared Verse, and you're going to see a guy that is primed and ready to be a starter at the next level. I think he's a little bit more complete maybe than Latu, but where is he going to fit in this draft is going to be key. I actually think that Jared Verse, if the Bears decide that they want to get the edge rusher instead of a receiver at 9, if they stay at 9, then I think Jared Verse may very well end up being that guy. after these two, there's still a lot to like at the position. Obviously you look at Darius Robinson and Chop Robinson. They're going to be back to back, and these are two completely different players, but there's a lot to like from both of them. Now, first, I think we have to stick with Darius Robinson. This was a dude who just put on an absolute show. 6'4", 6'5", 290 pounds, really burst onto the scene this past year. I think we knew who he was prior to this season, but 14 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks. This is a guy that has that positional versatility, right? I think he could play, in an even man front, either at the end, at end, or move in and be a 3 technique. I think he could also be a 5 technique as well. And you love his versatility. You love that for first and foremost. You love the long arms, but this is the guy that was showing quickness. He was beating his own teammate Javon Foster, with quick inside moves, the power in his hands. Another guy that the bull rush. I think this is just something that is going to be another check mark, right? Check it off the list. That's what scouts are doing at the combine. Is are we seeing does everything match what we saw on film, what we saw at the Senior Bowl or the other All-Star games like the East-West Shrine Bowl? And so you look at what Darius Robinson has done. I think this will be an easy check mark with him. I'll be curious to see how he tests out. Want to see some of the lateral agility with him as well, the change of direction, because this is the guy that plays well against the run. Now you got Chop Robinson there out of Penn State. And really, while we're talking about Chop Robinson, we'll also talk about Adisa Isaac, his running mate there with the Nittany Lions. Now with Chop Robinson, this is a guy that he's a difficult guy to evaluate, I think, just from the standpoint of production overall. You look at just 3 sacks this past season, but the win rate at the same time, 20.9% win rate, and the explosive first step. He is so quick coming off the football. It's absolutely ridiculous. Just put on the game film against Michigan, just beating Carson Barnhart like a drum, there at right tackle. And, Michigan immediately, I think Shamar Moore and Jim Harbaugh said, you know what? We've got to go ahead and move to the run. And that's really what they did for that entire game because they were worried about Chop Robinson coming off the edge. I want to see that explosiveness. I think that explosiveness is ultimately going to get himself drafted. I think, I look at a team like Houston potentially, eyeballing him there at 23. I think they could use an edge rusher, depending on how the workout goes. Maybe the Rams could be interested there at 19. I think that's a little bit too high for him. But I think Houston, I think Arizona could potentially use an edge rusher. There are a lot of teams as you get into that back half of round 1 that would definitely be interested in Chop Robinson. Now, Adisa Isaac is going to be another guy that you're going to see, the quick first step. You're going to see, the explosiveness coming into the backfield. And this was a guy that I thought really came into his own. 6'4", 248. I think there's going to be some questions. Can he potentially be a 34 outside linebacker? I don't know if the D linemen, if they're going to run them through any linebacker drills. I'd like to see if that's possible. That lateral agility. Want to see how he moves in space and not just coming after the quarterback. Look, 37 tackles, 16 going for loss, 7.5 sacks this past season. This is a guy that just continues to get better and better each and every year. You love the hands. Speed to power is pretty good there as well with Adisa, and he's a guy that I think is going to be on a lot of teams' radars there at the beginning of round 2. I've seen some people talk about him potentially coming off the board in round 1. I just don't see it. I don't see enough there from Adisa Isaac to say absolutely definitively he's going to be a first rounder. But I look at a team like Atlanta. If Atlanta doesn't go edge rusher, I firmly believe that they will take a quarterback, and I think it's probably going to end up being J.J. McCarthy, unless they make a deal for Justin Fields. Let's put that caveat in there. But I think Atlanta at 43, they should be interested in Adisa Isaac. I think that's definitely a home for him. If not, then I think Buffalo. Buffalo needs to figure out what they want to do, with the edge rush position, but he's not getting out of round 2. I think Buffalo there would kind of, if he falls into their lap, then I think that's kind of the move that they end up making. So it's going to be interesting to see how how he performs, because I think he's one of those guys stylistically, 34 outside linebacker. He reminds you a little bit of Arnold Ebiketie, and again, I think he's just scratching the surface on that potential because he just continues to get better and better. Now, I think the DL1 starting these drills off will be Austin Booker. Now, Austin Booker is another interesting cat because this is a guy who started his career at Minnesota, played 1 year there, and 6 games, not a whole lot of action. Transfers to Kansas as a redshirt sophomore, 56 tackles. Keep that in mind. I mean, that's something that, when you think about guys, his size, 6'6", 240, these are guys that just want to rush the quarterback, not him. 4th on the team in tackles, 12 tackles for loss, 8 sacks. And the thing with it was, you think, all right, this is a raw dude. And yes, there is some development that's needed to his game, especially, the pass rush arsenal, putting the tools to the tool belt there. But when you think about, the speed to power that he showed, the athleticism, he was able to beat guys with both speed and power at the Senior Bowl. You want to see him in some of the drills. Look, when I talk about Tuli Tuipulotu, he was a guy that was one of my favorite edge rushers. He was versatile. You could line him up. They were lining up all over the field, whether it was inside, outside. It didn't really matter. But when you watched him in the drills at the Combine, he would hit those bags so hard with those hands. Those are the type of guys that really, it made you stand up and take notice. And, he was a second rounder. And I think the sky's the limit for him there in LA with the Chargers. Now, when I look at a guy like Austin Booker, he's a guy that I think is going to end up being a day 2 pick. Is he going to be a second rounder? I don't think. I think he's a little green, and so that's why I think the likelihood of him being around in the 3rd round, I think, is pretty high. I had him coming off the board, potentially number 65 to Carolina. But ultimately, I've got him coming off the board in my first, 7-round mock draft, 89 overall to Tampa. Tampa could use another edge rusher. And I think that this could be a guy, you move him to a 34 outside linebacker. He's got tremendous length. I want to see how he moves. Can he move in space? And how fluid of an athlete is he? You see some of that, but I think really when you get into some of these drills, if we can check that box off, that's really going to help things for him in terms of his overall draft stock. Now, again, we're covering edge rushers, kind of going through this first, and then we'll kind of talk about the defensive tackles after that. I don't think they're going to divide them up, although I know they've done that in the past, edge rushers and D linemen, so it'll be interesting to see if they do that again. I'll be curious to see where Brandon Dorlus lines up. He's 6'3", 290 out of Oregon. He's a bit of a tweener. He's a guy that is a surefire 5 technique, in my opinion. Could he kick inside and play D tackle in an even man front? Sure. But I think for me, when I watch Brandon Dorlus, this is the guy that, he continues to get better and better, does a really good job setting the edge. I look at him and that 5 technique, I look at a team like Carolina at the top of round 3. That's ultimately where I have Brandon Dorlus coming off the board. You want to see that athleticism. Look, this guy, he played tight end at one point and ultimately moved over to the offensive or the defensive side of the football, 6.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 9 pass breakups, 14 total pass breakups in his career, even knocking down passes there at the Senior Bowl. So Brandon Dorlus will be another guy that I'm looking out for. Just going to be curious to see which drill set of drills he's going to be lined up and taking on. But he's a guy that I think everybody should be excited to watch because there is that positional versatility coming from Dorlus. I think Jonah Ellis out of Utah, it's going to be interesting to watch him. I'm curious to see what he's going to weigh in at, to be perfectly honest with you. Jonah Ellis, really burst onto the scene this year. This is his first year where we really saw Jonah Ellis take off, right? I mean, he had showed potential in 2022, 6 tackles for loss, 3 sacks in 11 games. 2023, battled some injuries, still ended up with 16 tackles for loss and 12 sacks. The spin move absolutely money. That's one of and I think his dad, Luther Ellis, is on the record saying, look, he told his son that he was going to need that go-to move, his signature move, and it's that spin move, man. He's got that thing down. You watch that UCLA game, 5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. He could not be blocked. Had a 4-game stretch there, including that one where he had 8 sacks. 8 sacks in a 4-game span against UCLA, Oregon State, Cal, and USC. I mean, that's those are our 4 teams that were solid there in the Pac-12, and Jonah Ellis just carving up those offensive lines. The athleticism, I think, is going to absolutely be there. And it'll be good to see just what that athleticism looks like out there on the field. Justin Eboigbe out of Alabama. This is a guy that I think could end up being a late day 2 or early day 3 guy. He reminds me a lot of Byron Young, also coming out of Alabama. And look, Byron Young was able to kick inside to defensive tackle. I think Eboigbe could easily be a 5 technique as well. If you get a team like the Ravens get their hands on him, I think that's a good look. With the Eboigbe, look, he's 6'5", 290, 295, moves well for a guy his size. Does a good job setting the edge, can get after the quarterback a little bit, plays the run really well. So he'll be an interesting guy to watch. Marshawn Nealon and Cedric Johnson, Western Michigan and Mississippi respectively. Now with Marshawn Nealon, this dude is all about the power, right? And I think that's one of the things that really jumped off was you saw the power, you saw the strength, you saw his ability. He wanted to beat up offensive linemen. 6'3", 235 there. And, in Kalamazoo, he was a guy, 28 tackles for loss, 12.5 sacks in his career, 57 tackles this past season as well. So he was among the team leaders in total tackles. This dude is intense, and he wants to make you pay. So I'm just curious, to see the athleticism. You put him against some of these other guys, as you're watching him out there on the field, just how athletic is he going to be? And why I mentioned, Cedric Johnson, this is a guy that, has all the talent, right? He's, 6'3", 240, 250, 19 sacks, 22 tackles for loss. But, I think there's some concern about his bendiness. He's not overly bendy. He's a guy that's going to do well against the run. How effective is he going to be against the pass on a consistent basis? Can he consistently win off the edge? That's going to be a guy that I'm going to be keeping an eye on for sure. But I'd be remiss, and I haven't talked about him to this point, but one of my favorite edge rushers is Braylon Trice out of Washington. Good Lord, 80 total pressures, including 53 hurries. When you think about that, I mean, that's mind-boggling what this guy has been able to do. Only 8 sacks with that, but here's the thing. He doesn't always have to get home. His motor is always running, and look, you don't always have to get home. A lot of times those pressures end up leading to big plays and for the defensive side of the ball. And number 8 lived in opposing backfields nonstop. You saw the hands, you saw his ability to bend. I think he's a lot, he's not as bendy as some of these other pass rushers, and that's ultimately why I think he ends up falling to round 2. I would love to see him come off the board in round 1. I actually had him coming off the board in round 1. If he can showcase a little bit more athleticism, right now I've got him, 36 overall to the Commanders. But man, if he could show that ability to bend, in addition to the power, in addition to using those hands, frankly, show us a little bit more than just always attacking that outside. He's going to attack the outside, he's going to move his hands back to the inside, but adding a little bit more to that pass rush repertoire. Want to see what the hands look like as well. But I think Braylon Trice to me is a guy that is one of those tweeners, and I think he's a guy that will be a good to leave the edge rushers on. 2 other guys that I want to throw out: Javon Solomon of Troy, Xavier Thomas of Clemson. Javon Solomon is a top-notch edge rusher out of Troy. Now, when you think of Troy edge rushers, the first name that you think of is obviously DeMarcus Ware. Now, Javon Solomon is not DeMarcus Ware in the slightest. You won't confuse the two of them because Javon Solomon, he's 6'2", 246. He's a little bit undersized, playing that linebacker D-end position there, but had 2 seasons with double-digit sacks, 16 this past season, 18 tackles for loss. This dude knows how to get home. The speed coming off the edge, so that's something that you're definitely going to be watching out for, is that speed and his ability to bend, get off the edge. That's a guy to me that, look, probably that 4th, 5th round range, because I think, can he drop? I would have loved to have actually seen him line up with the linebackers, to be perfectly honest with you, but I think he's a dude that is going to have a day there at the Combine. And then Xavier Thomas, look, 6'2", 270. This guy's battled injuries. He got hurt, in 2022. I think there were injuries throughout his career. Can he stay healthy? When healthy, look, this guy did rack up 18 tackles for loss, 33 tackles for loss, 18 sacks, 7 pass breakups, 6 forced fumbles in his 6 seasons there at Clemson. But, played in 5 games in 2020. That's not just due to COVID. Played in just 3 games in 2022. Struggled to finish an entire season. And when healthy, this guy is explosive. It's just a matter of keeping him on the field. And so I think the medicals are going to be huge for him in terms of where his draft stock is going to be. So I think as we transition from the edge rushers, we look at the defensive linemen, and obviously the eyes are going to go to Byron Murphy II and Jerzon Johnny Newton of Illinois. Now, who's going to be DT1 in this draft class? I think it's going to be tight. I think it's really what you're looking for with this. I think when you look at a guy like Johnny Newton, what you're getting is an undersized, 3 technique, 6'2", 280 pounds, 27.5 tackles for loss, 18 sacks, including 7.5 this past season. This is a guy who is so quick coming off the football. I mean, he just makes guys look silly with his ability to shoot those gaps and get into the backfield and get after the quarterback. Now, look, he's not just a one-trick pony. He can also play the run. He is a little undersized, but look, here's another guy who was undersized. He's 6'2" and 280 pounds. I think of a guy like Kalijah Cansey. Kalijah Cansey at 6 foot 275, number 19 overall by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? So in his 3 seasons, 34.5 tackles for loss, 16 sacks, had 7.5 sacks in his final year. And then, look, when Kalijah Cansey showed up at the Combine, I think a lot of people were curious to see just how quick he was going to be. And I think what really did it for everyone was that 40 time. 4.67 40, 1.64 10-yard split. He actually was 6'1", so he was measured in a little bit taller there, and 281 pounds. Jerzon Newton, look, if Johnny can run in that same range, then we're looking at a guy who is going to come off the board somewhere close to that 19 overall. And I think when I look at what Cansey's been able to do there at Tampa, I look at Arizona sitting there at 27. I think that's ultimately where Johnny Newton ends up coming off the board. Now, Byron Murphy II. This is a guy that should very well end up being DT1. And that's kind of where I have him slated as of right now. This is a guy, you look at the win rate. The win rate is absolutely insane. 19.6% at the D tackle spot. When you look at total pressures, 45 total pressures. This is a guy that was living in the backfield. You saw the quickness, his ability to beat guys off the line with the quickness, but also the lateral agility, chasing down running backs, being able to, use that stack, shed, come down the line, fill gaps, and make plays on the running back right around the line of scrimmage. To me, I think Byron Murphy's a guy that people have him going as high as 11 to the Vikings. I've seen people put him as low as Buffalo at 28. Ultimately, I've got him going somewhere in between there. I've got him actually coming off the board, number 16 overall to Seattle. I think you line him up again. You can play him at a multitude of positions. If you got even man, odd man front, I think he's scheme versatile, and I think Seattle will be getting a guy that could be a playmaker for them, on the interior of that defensive line for them. So beyond him, though, or those two guys, there's a guy by the name of T'Vondre Sweat. Now, T'Vondre Sweat did not weigh in at the Senior Bowl. So, obviously there's a question about his weight. How much is he, he's measured in, officially in the well, it's not really official, but in the books, it's 6'4", 340. And so, but you look at his stats, 17 and a half tackles for loss, 5 sacks in his career. But look, when you think about him and you think about like his win rate, when you talk about a guy like T'Vondre Sweat, a big man like that, 26 pressures, 15.3% win rate as a giant-sized nose tackle, right? You see tremendous power, his ability to hold the point of attack, eats up blocks. I mean, I think he was a guy that was probably Jalen Ford, the linebacker's favorite guy on defense, because all he would do is just take up blockers left and right. But the quickness coming off the ball to be able to pursue the quarterback, and then his ability to chase running backs down the line, that was something that just seemed to pop off every chance that that he had. It always seemed like you saw T'Vondre Sweat making plays. And so I think of guys his size. There are 3 guys that I'm going to talk about here. And the first one's going to be Dontari Poe. Dontari Poe measured in at 6'3", 342 pounds. And, he came out, ultimately was the 11th overall pick in the 2012 draft. Okay? So when you think about this guy and you think about, the Combine, he shows up, he actually measures in at 6'3" and a half at 346. So, but runs a 4.98 40 with a 1.67 10-yard split. And that freakish athleticism ultimately gets him drafted number 12 overall. Next guy that we're going to talk about is the mammoth Tampa Bay Buccaneer, Vita Vea. Now, Vita Vea, they had him at 6'4" and 347. Sounds pretty close to where we had T'Vondre Sweat, right? So, Vita Vea, 15 tackles for loss, 9.5 sacks in his 3 years there at Washington. Then he shows up at the Combine, 6'4", 347, 5.10 40, and a 1.76 10-yard split. Ends up getting drafted number 12 overall. Finally, we're going to talk about Jordan Davis. Now, Jordan Davis, obviously, we know athletic freak, right? They're out of Georgia. So, written down 6'6", 336. Okay? So then he shows up, first the stats, 12 and a half tackles for loss, 7 sacks in his career, but, it wasn't just that. It was, the presence that he had. 6'6", 341, that 4.78 40, which is just nasty with a 1.63 10-yard split, 32-inch vertical leap. And, where did Jordan Davis get drafted? Number 13 overall. So I say that because T'Vondre Sweat, you see some twitchiness to him. You see his ability to move. And I think if he's anywhere close to where these guys are producing, nobody's really talking about T'Vondre Sweat as a first-round pick. And everybody has those other 2 guys as 1 and 2 definitively. But if T'Vondre Sweat could do what these other guys have done before him, he stands a good chance of seeing that stock rise exponentially. And then suddenly people are going to be talking about T'Vondre Sweat as a guy that, oh man, we had him, in the first round from day one. No, there aren't too many people talking about it. But look, it's all, to me, I think this is what's going to tip the scale for him. Right now, I have him as a second rounder, with the caveat that, because look, we want to know what he's weighing. We want to know if weight is going to be an issue, but then we also want to see the movement. Just how quick is this dude? You watch him in the drills, I think he's going to show you why. Other guys that we're going to see, Leonard Taylor. I'm going to be curious to see if Leonard Taylor is going to work out. Leonard Taylor is has battled some injuries there at Miami. When healthy, this guy is so explosive. 6'3", 305, 22 and a half tackles for loss. Really, his best year was his sophomore season. 10 and a half tackles for loss, 3 sacks, had an interception as well. want to see if he's healthy. If he is, then he'll be a guy to keep an eye out for sure. Mason Smith out of LSU. Everyone talked about Mason Smith, and rightfully so after that freshman season. Freshman year, look at 6'6", 292. This guy was putting up 5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks in just 7 games there in 2021. Impressive stuff. So everyone was expecting him in 2022 to be, hey, that's going to be your top defensive tackle. Played in 1 game, tears his ACL, and I thought 2023, he was kind of forcing it, trying to get back, showed some flashes, but never really returned to that level. I think there's a team that could end up getting a steal here. I think really the biggest thing is what is he going to come in at? Is he going to, the weight? Is he going to come in and look the part and work out like a guy who should be taken on day 2? This was the guy that everyone was talking about as a potential first rounder. I think there's still some of that chatter. I think he can fall all the way to day 3. I think that's a big question mark there. And ultimately, I think with Mason Smith, this is a guy that you have to kind of put that, draw that circle around. And as he works out there, can he showcase that athleticism? If he can, then I think people are going to go back to the tape again and say, you know what, maybe we ought to take one more look at this guy. Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State is a guy, look, I think there are other guys at the defensive end position or defensive tackle position that are getting more love, Chris Jenkins being one of them. And I think Chris Jenkins is a nice player. He's 6'3", 275. I think, I look at Green Bay, play him at that 5 technique. Hey, play him, he can play inside or outside, inside on even man front. The production just wasn't quite there. 8.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks in his career. But you see the athleticism, you see the potential that's there. He's definitely going to be a second-round pick. Like I said, Green Bay is probably going to be targeting him. But I think that makes a lot of sense. But Michael Hall Jr., undersized, and I think that's one of the things that the undersized D tackles a lot of times will get overlooked. But look, I think is he 6'3"? I think they show him at 6'3". I think he's probably going to be about 6'1", and 290 pounds, but so explosive. I think that's one of the things that you saw jump off the film. 7.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. This past season, not nearly as productive, but this is still a guy who is one of the better pass rushers at that defensive end position in the draft. And 18.3% win rate. That's just a little over, just under 1.5 percentage points different from Byron Murphy. So Michael Hall Jr. is a guy that should be coming off the board in round number 2, and I'm looking forward to seeing the athleticism there. Brandon Fisk out of Florida State, Gabe Hall out of Baylor. Gabe Hall, look, nobody was really talking about this guy. In terms of what he could do. You saw him at the Senior Bowl. He really came on and showcased that ability. 6'5", 290. I think there's some scheme versatility to him as well. 16.5 tackles for loss, 11.5 sacks. He was a guy that really burst onto the scene for me. 2021, 7 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. That's really where I started to take notice and watch him. He's a guy that could end up being a late day 2 guy and be a big surprise. And then Braden Fisk, another guy that I think disrespected in a way because people aren't as talking about him nearly as much as they probably should. 6'3", 300. Had 13.5 sacks, 27 tackles for loss at Western Michigan. Shows up at Florida State, 9 tackles for loss, 6 sacks. You saw the motor. This was a guy that was always looking to play with his hair on fire. Was always getting into the backfield, creating a lot of havoc, a lot of pressure. So I think he's a guy that is looking to put his stamp on day 2. And then how about Dwayne Carter? Dwayne Carter is a dude that I think everybody on social media is posting about Dwayne Carter and what he did at Florida State. I think Was it Maurice Smith that was the center? But at 6'3", 300, just bowls him over en route to Jordan Travis. And the power that this man displays, the power, the leverage, the hands. Had 11 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks in 2022, was building on every single year. 2023, look, 3.5 tackles for loss, just 1 sack. So I think if you're just hunting the stats, you're going to look at that and say, not really something that I can get excited about, right? Wrong. He's a guy that can push the pocket from within. He's a stalwart there against the run, and I think he's improving as a pass rusher and continuing to get after the quarterback. He's a guy, I think if he works out well, he'll be a guy who's going to see his draft stock continue to rise and solidify his status as a day 2 pick. Other guys in this group to look at, McKinley Jackson of Texas A&M, 6'2", 325 pounds, plays with really good leverage at the nose tackle spot. One edge rusher that I forgot to talk about was Muhammad Kamara, and how could I do that? This guy was one of my favorite guys to watch there at Colorado State. Really burst onto the scene there against Colorado, and when he went out of the game, ultimately, that was kind of the beginning of the end for the Rams because they couldn't quite put the same pressure that he was. I mean, it seemed like he was in the backfield just left and right. 5 total tackles, 2 sacks in that game. Had 3 sacks against Utah State. 6'3", 245, 13 sacks, 17 tackles for loss, and a guy that's just going to continue to come at you. He's going to come at you with speed. He's going to come at you with intensity, and a guy, 19.4% win rate as well. So he's a guy that's going to continue to bend off that edge. Want to see that athleticism on display. I think he'll be an early day 3 pick, but a guy that could slide into that day 2 consideration depending on how that workout pans out. One final guy is Ruko Ororo. I think he's flying under some people's radar. A guy that I think can get after the pass. He can also set the edge against the run. I think he's one of those guys that was never very flashy, so I don't think he jumps off and gets everyone excited. But he's just a guy that's been solid there, and I think that's something that teams are going to be looking for sure. Some guys to make mention of that won't be invited to the Combine. Christian Boyd out of Northern Iowa. And look, the UNI guy, man, you watched him at the Senior Bowl, and he proved that he belongs. So nasty, so physical. The mean streak was definitely there. You saw the speed to power, just driving guys into the backfield. I for sure thought that Senior Bowl performance, if nothing else, would have gotten him there to the Combine. Evan Anderson out of Florida Atlantic, another guy who's just a mammoth of a man. I mean, Evan Anderson seemed to be around the football all the time there for the Owls. He's 6'3", 356 pounds. He's huge, but 58 tackles, 5.5 going for loss, 3.5 sacks. And when you think about this, you think about a guy his size. You think about just how many how many tackles did this guy have? Again, 58. That's 5th on the team in total tackles. Your nose tackle. I think he's a guy that is going to surprise. We're going to see him rise up draft boards. Jawan Briggs, kind of an undersized 3 technique. Latuli Nasanoa out of Washington. A guy that's physical at the point of attack. And then Jamri Chroma. And this is a guy who started his career at Rutgers, moved on to James Madison, 6'4", 275. He's probably the Duke's best pro prospect. 19.5 tackles for loss and 10 sacks with 59 tackles. And yet again, another guy at that defensive line spot. Look, he was the 3rd leading tackler on the team. I think he comes off the board in round number 7. I think a team like the 49ers would be a nice fit for him. He's one of those guys that I think is could end up making a team because I love the athleticism. I love the size. I said the 49ers. Because that length, that size makes a lot of sense. I think Carolina, I think the Ravens, there are a lot of different teams that can end up liking, this guy there, potentially as a 5 technique. I actually have him coming off the board, number 245 overall to Houston. Put him there in an offense. He's one of those bigger D linemen, either end or tackle with D'Amico Ryans. I said 49ers. but all of that started with the Miko Ryans, right? So I think that's where it makes a lot of sense. 245 overall. Keep an eye out for Jamari Coma on draft day. Which takes us to the linebackers. So the linebackers, we have a total of 30. And if we talk about, looking at how many linebackers are drafted every year, you're looking at about 28. And over the last 3 years, that's the average. So I think the premier linebacker is going to be Dallas Turner, right? Dallas Turner, I think everybody was wanting to see, was it just a fluke what he was able to do there at Alabama with Will Anderson opposite him? No problem, right? 55 total pressures, 11 sacks, 19.6% win rate. And again, all these stats that I've been throwing at you, all courtesy of Pro Football Focus. I need to quote the source. Thank you, Pro Football Focus, for all the stats. The website, phenomenal with gathering all of the data. And but Dallas Turner, look, this is a guy, the speed coming off the edge. I love that how he uses his length. He's 6'4", 245. Love how he uses his length to his advantage to set the edge against the run as well. He's going to be working some linebacker drills. Wasn't asked to drop a lot. He and Chris Braswell, those will be guys that I'll be watching drop quite a bit. I'll be looking to see exactly how he can perform there in some of those drills. Speaking of Chris Braswell, he's going to be a guy that I think will come off the board on day 2. He's physical at the point of attack, good get off coming off the football, and a guy that can make some plays against the run. Just want to see just exactly how athletic Braswell is going to be. When you look at him, 6'3", 255, really it's just going to be about, just how, the movement skills, the ability to change direction as well. How well can he drop into coverage? Those are going to be things that teams are going to be looking for sure from him. But I think when you look at linebackers beyond Dallas Turner, there are three other guys that I think could end up coming off the board in round number 2. Edgerrin Cooper of Texas A&M, Jeremiah Trotter of Clemson, Trevin Wallace of Kentucky. Now, Edgerrin Cooper is one of those interesting guys, right? I mean, burst onto the scene this year, 10 sacks. You saw the instincts, his ability to come downhill in a hurry, the sideline to sideline ability. He reads and reacts so quickly, and then makes such a quick break on the football that the offensive linemen oftentimes don't even have a chance to put a body on 45. First team All-American, 17 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, 84 total tackles. This was a guy that was all over the place. The Steelers really like him. Could he come off the board in round 1? I think the thing for me is can he drop into coverage? I think that's going to be the biggest thing. We know that he can rush the passer. We know that he has the sideline to sideline ability. We know he can come downhill and shoot the gaps phenomenally well. I actually have him coming off the board in the second round, number 51 overall, to the Steelers, but he could very well come off the board in round number 1. I love that athleticism. And speaking of athleticism, yes, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., the son of the namesake, who was just one of those dogs there for the Eagles for so long. Such a tremendous player. And Jeremiah Trotter Jr., the son, 29.5 tackles for loss, 13 sacks, 10 pass breakups, 4 interceptions, back-to-back seasons with at least 85 tackles. And here's the thing: he can drop into coverage. He has that sideline to sideline ability. He can get after the quarterback as well. He feels like a little bit more of a polished linebacker than does Edgerrin Cooper. The difference, Edgerrin Cooper, I think, is a little bit bigger. So I'll be curious to see the measurables. Jeremiah Trotter, they have him at 6'1". Is he really 6'1"? He might come in at around 5'11"-ish. But again, there are a lot of players that, that 5'11" doesn't mean squat. There are a lot of guys. Look, Zach Thomas entered the league, and he was president of that under 6 foot club, right? So it's something that is going to be interesting as we watch this. But Jeremiah Trotter, to me, is about as polished as you get. He's one of those guys that flashed, especially at the end of the season there for Clemson, defensively a season ago. And then the last linebacker that I mentioned is Trevin Wallace. Now, with Trevin Wallace, this is a guy that, again, speed kills. And when I watch Trevin Wallace, at 6'2", 220, I think is what they have him listed at. I'll be curious to see exactly what the measurements are going to be there, because he's obviously going to get compared to Jamin Davis. Now, is he going to be a first rounder? I saw some people throwing that around potentially. I don't see that happening. Jamin Davis at 6'3", 234, pick number 19 overall in the 2021 draft. But I think one of the big things for him was at the Combine at 6'3" and 234, ran a 4.47 40 with a 1.53 split. Is Wallace going to run sub 4.5? I don't think so, but I think he has the ability to run in the 4.5s. And that's going to turn some heads. I think that's ultimately get himself drafted there on day 2. My favorite linebacker, none other than Payton Wilson. The biggest issue with Payton Wilson, I think if it hadn't been for the injuries, I'd have him in the first round. And I still want to put him in round number 2, but the biggest thing is those medicals. He's got the shoulder, he's got knee injury, and really what are those medicals going to look like? Because at 6'4" and 235 pounds, Payton Wilson is a heat-seeking missile. He lines up all over the field, and again, I liken him to Jack Campbell from a season ago. It feels so similar when you look at what Jack Campbell was able to do there at Iowa. So let's compare something. Let's do this a little bit. Compare the stats, compare the size. Jack Campbell 6'5", 243. Payton Wilson 6'4", 235. Okay, Jack Campbell essentially 2 years on the field there at Iowa, 2021 and 2022, where he made a big impact and only played 7 games prior to that, but ends his career with 302 tackles, 12.5 going for loss, 3 sacks, 5 interceptions, 10 pass breakups. Able, showcase his ability to make plays sideline to sideline. The instincts were off the charts, and then the ability to drop into coverage. That was something that definitely jumped off as well. So then you look at a guy like Payton Wilson. So this was a guy, he's played in some additional games. In 2021, only played in just the 2 games, but 402 tackles in his 4 years where he really saw significant action. 48 tackles for loss, 15 sacks, 7 interceptions, including 3 this past season, 13 pass breakups. Sounds very similar, doesn't it? Now the only difference is Jack Campbell, that was a guy that stayed healthy and didn't have the injury issues. But moreover, what Jack Campbell did at the Combine really solidified his status. So at just under 6'5", 249 pounds, runs a 4.65 40 and a 1.59 10-yard split. Also runs that short shuttle, 4.24, 3-cone drill at a 6.74, which, he was running times that the running backs and receivers would be proud of. 37.5-inch vertical leap, and Dan Campbell, he was looking for a particular guy on the defensive side of the football, and he found it there in Jack Campbell. Payton Wilson's going to be a guy that I think teams may pass on and wait until round number 3. But look, Fred Warner, one of the better linebackers that we've seen in the last few seasons in the league. Fred Warner was a 3rd-round pick. And let's take a look, real quick at what Fred Warner did at the Combine. Because yes, 6'3", 230 pounds, and 3rd round, 70th overall pick there for the 49ers. And I think teams, regret the decision, because look, you look at it overall, 264 tackles for the Cougars, they're BYU, 6.5 sacks, 7 interceptions. So making plays on the football, a guy that knows how to bring it against both the run and the pass. At 6'3", 236, runs a 4.64 40 with a 1.55 10-yard split, 4.28 short shuttle, 6'9", 3-cone drill, and a 38.5-inch vertical leap. He ultimately comes off the board in round number 3 and is one of the best linebackers in all of college football. So I'm just saying, if those medicals check out for Payton Wilson, if there are no degenerative issues with the knee, shoulder's going to be okay. When this guy's healthy, that dude is money. I'm telling you. So he's a guy I'm looking, hopefully, he stays healthy throughout the process, can run all the drills, and he's a guy that I think could easily be a first-round pick, had it not been for the injuries. Some other linebackers to really make mention of: Tyrus Knight out of UTEP. This is a dude, 140 tackles this past season. And I think you're going to see some fluidity to his game. He's a guy that can absolutely drop into coverage, does a great job reading the quarterback's eyes, and the change of direction. Uses those eyes to take him to the football, makes a play on it. 15.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks this past season, 7 pass breakups as well. Sideline to sideline ability. You saw the instincts though. His ability to slip blocks, beating, the pulling guard, shooting some of those holes, getting into the backfield, making plays behind the line of scrimmage. A guy that, look, he'll fill the hole and come with some mean intentions as well. He's a guy, look, I've got him penciled in round number 4, and if he makes a splash here at the Combine, teams will chase that at speed at times, and so he's a guy that I think can end up coming off the board maybe a little bit higher. But look, again, all that offensive talent, because we know the wide receivers are going to be loaded. We know the offensive line is going to be loaded. And what's happening at the top of that draft with all those quarterbacks potentially coming off the board, defensive players could end up sliding. So I think linebacker is going to be a position that teams will be looking to jump on. How about, you go to the Big Ten and you look at Junior Colson, Tommy Eichenberg. Tommy Eichenberg is a middle linebacker, and he's a dude that's going to, he can move sideline to sideline. I think what he needs to do is be able to show everyone that he has that ability to play sideline to sideline. That he's not just a 2-down thumper coming downhill. He can blitz a little bit. Can you drop into coverage? How are those hips? Are there stiffness in those hips? That's going to be a big question mark. Junior Colson's a bigger linebacker there at Michigan, and want to see just how fluid of an athlete he is. I think he's been able to showcase as well that he can get outside, make plays on the boundary, can drop into coverage a little bit. Jalen Ford out of Texas. I mentioned him earlier, and Jalen Ford, I watch him. He makes plays, but he's not the best athlete, I don't think. 6'2", 221, back-to-back seasons, over 100 tackles, double-digit tackles for loss, 6 interceptions. So you see the instincts, you see his ability to put himself in a position to make a play on the football, whether it's in the running game or dropping into coverage. I just want to see if there's any athleticism there. If he has any chance to be one of those in that first group of linebackers coming off the board, that's going to be a big question mark for me. Tyron Hopper out of Missouri. I don't know if he's going to be healthy enough to work out at the Combine, but this is a guy who has tremendous athleticism. I look at him as a 5th-round linebacker. Look, Dre Greenlaw was a 5th-round linebacker. I have him going to Tennessee. I thought that was a great fit for him. 6'2", around 230 pounds, 29 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks, 9 pass breakups. He's a 3-down linebacker. That's the thing that I like about him. I think he has the range, takes excellent angles. He's a guy that I'm excited to see at the next level. How about Cedric Gray out of North Carolina? Another dude that just comes with bad intentions. I saw some film of him online and just running guys over. It was pretty funny. I mean, he just knocked the heck out of this guy. Another guy at 6'2", 225, had 145 tackles in 2022, followed up with 121 back-to-back seasons, double-digit tackles for loss, 5 sacks this past season, 13 pass breakups, 5 forced fumbles. Guy's got a nose for the football, and he's instinctive. He plays sideline to sideline. He's that off-ball linebacker that does a little bit of everything for you. I've got him coming off the board right now in round number 3. Again, it was just all the offensive talent that pushes some of the defensive players down on the board. He's a guy that I think could end up coming off the board in round number 2. I mentioned Payton Wilson. I've got him coming off the board in round 3 to the Seahawks. Really don't know what the Seahawks are going to do at linebacker. Is Bobby Wagner coming back? Is Jordan Brooks coming back? We really don't know, so that's why I have him going there. And then 87 overall, Dallas Cowboys need a linebacker. Cedric Gray, I think, would look great with that star on his helmet. So I think that makes a lot of sense as well. Day 3 finds, how about a Jontre Hunter out of Georgia State? Converted safety. I think he's up to 240 pounds now. But you watch his speed. His ability to get outside, chase all the way to the perimeter. You saw that at the Senior Bowl. He's a guy, I think the speed is what's ultimately going to turn people's heads, and people are going to look at Jontre Hunter and say, you know what, this is a guy that we need to take another look at there. Look, Georgia State, the Panthers not getting a ton of looks there, but man, when you come out at linebacker, 96 tackles, 7 going for loss, 4 pass breakups in that final year. He struggled a bit to stay on the field. But these last 2 years, I think really, became the focal point of that defense there. Jordan McGee out of Temple. Jordan McGee is a guy that nobody is talking about this guy. But he's a guy that can get after the quarterback. He can drop into coverage. He's a guy that has tremendous range. I just think that he's a guy that is going to end up being one of those day 3 picks, and we're going to be looking at it going, why weren't we talking about Jordan McGee sooner? So he'll be a guy that's going to be interesting to watch. Gabriel Murphy out of UCLA, edge rusher. Put him through the linebacker drills. Let's see what he can do. It's interesting. They've got Grayson Murphy, Latu, a little bit bigger. Grayson Murphy at 6'2", 235. Look, he's smaller, and you look at him, and pretty solid career overall. But really, what it was that senior season that really put him on the map, right? Had 8 sacks, 16 tackles for loss. Really after that 2021 season there at North Texas, where he really put himself on the map, he and his brother Grayson, who, by the way, one of the snubs. Can we talk about Grayson real quick? Because Grayson, look, when you look at his numbers in terms of his sacks while at UCLA, they're not too far off. In fact, he actually had more sacks than his brother. They're about the same size. When you look at just productivity overall, these are two guys that were very similar. And I think Grayson Murphy is going to end up finding himself not only on a roster. I think he's going to get himself drafted. But with Grayson Murphy, I think that could he be a 3rd rounder? Maybe, but I think likely it's going to be 4th, 5th round range is really what makes sense. I think his brother is going to come probably a round or 2 after that. But I think the Murphy family is going to be happy on draft day. Nathaniel Watson of Mississippi State. He lacks overall length and he lacks speed. So that could be a huge issue, right? He's 6'2", 245. But here's the thing. I watched this guy play with Jet Johnson behind Jaden Crumedy and I think I'm pronouncing that right, and Nathan Pickering. 2 D tackles that, look, they ate up blocks and allowed these guys to eat behind them. And those are 2 guys that I think could end up on NFL rosters. They'll be either late day 3 priority free agents, but a couple of D tackles that you could see at the next level for sure. But all Watson did last 2 seasons with the Bulldogs, 250 tackles. 250. Now, obviously, when you think about it, in 2023, 102 of his 137 tackles were assisted. Only 35 solo tackles. So, he may get a knock for that. But then you're going to look at, okay, well, in those 2 seasons, 25 tackles for loss, 16 sacks, including 10 this past season. Not a whole lot in terms of the productivity dropping into coverage, and that's really where things get him. Is he, how stiff is he going to be? Can he cover running backs and tight ends out of the backfield, or is this guy really, mostly a guy that's going to come downhill, fill gaps, and get after the quarterback? What's that versatility going to look like? I think for me, can he showcase a little bit more athleticism? That's something that I think will definitely improve his draft stock if he can showcase that. And then Edefon Olofosho, I know he's a little bit undersized. He's 6'1", 235, but watch the fluidity in his game when he drops into coverage. You saw it there against Michigan in the title game, a 4th and 2 play where Roman Wilson runs that out from the slot, and he's actually rushing the passer, reads the play, changes direction, gets outside, gets his hand in to affect that pass right at the catch point, right? Ends up breaking it up. That athleticism, teams are going to be looking for that at the linebacker position, so he's a guy to definitely be on the lookout for sure as well. Linebackers, when we talk about the snubs, I've already mentioned Grayson Murphy. Jackson Sermon has had some potential, could drop into coverage a little bit, has that bloodlines. Omar Spates out of LSU. Look, I thought he disappeared at LSU. I wish he would have stayed at Oregon State. I thought, 6'1", 237, doesn't have ideal length, and just wasn't making a lot of plays. Luke Reimer of Nebraska is the guy that I think people aren't talking about, but when he was healthy there at Nebraska at 6'1", 220, this guy was a gamer. This guy flew around, made a lot of plays, and could drop, make plays in coverage, could get after the quarterback a little bit. Look, he played in 10 games this year, 5 sacks. The biggest thing is the injuries. That's going to be the biggest knock on him. Same goes with Jalen Green out of James Madison. If you just want to look at the numbers, this was a dude that led the league in sacks, led the FBS in sacks, right? Dude was always in opposing backfields. Didn't start until his final year because he was behind Isaac Ukwu, who transferred to Mississippi, and Green ends up with 18 sacks, 20% win rate with that as well. But he's 6'1", 245, lacks ideal length, and then he blows his knee out. So I think the length already was hurting him, and then he tears his ACL, and so that's why he wasn't invited. Would have liked to have seen him potentially get to talk to the coaches and such, but I think at JMU's Pro Day, when people are out to see Chroma work out, they'll have their opportunity to have those conversations. I think he's going to be an undrafted free agent, but I hope for him with those injuries that he's able to make it out there on the field. Then we look at the defensive backs. Defensive backs on March 1st. Terrion Arnold is the number 1 corner. I think there's no doubt about it. This is a guy that's just continued to get better and better. Redshirt sophomore. It was really Kool-Aid McKinstry that everyone was talking about. But when you watch Terrion Arnold, watch the hips, watch the feet. The feet are phenomenal. The change of direction is ridiculous with this guy. He's so smooth and so fluid of an athlete that I think he can hang with some of the shiftier receivers, but then he also will bring some of that feistiness and some of that strength to his game as well. So he's CB1. I think there's no doubt about that. But CB2 for me is going to be Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo. If this guy could run a 4.3 40 after what he did at the Senior Bowl, just dominating guys, then I think Quinyon Mitchell is a shoo-in to be, I've got him coming off the board number 19 overall to the Rams. At 6 foot, 197. I was talking about him in 2021 when he had those 8 pass breakups for the Rockets. All he did after that, another 6 interceptions, including 5 in 2022, and another 37 pass breakups, 45 total in his career. But he played mostly in zone and off coverage, right? Shows up at the Senior Bowl, press man, no issues whatsoever. He can be a lockdown corner, playing in virtually any style of defense and get the job done. Kool-Aid McKinstry, I think, look, this is a guy that's going to be on a mission. He's no longer talked about as the number 1 corner. Right now, he can fall all the way to number 4 behind Nate Wiggins even. but this is a guy who has the ball skills. I think it's just a matter of going out there and showcasing. Look, he also returned punts for Bama. He has that suddenness to his game, that change of direction, the ability to drive on the football. So I think McKinstry is one of those guys. Look, he's going to be in that competition there. And then Nate Wiggins, 6'2", 175. I know, the slight build, but look, nobody shied away from Emmanuel Forbes. He was a playmaker, 6 pick sixes. Obviously, that's something that teams were obviously looking at. But with Nate Wiggins, I think you want to see the fluidity there for a guy as tall as he is, and that athleticism on display. I mean, you see that on the game film, but that's something that, again, you want to make sure that it translates. Ennis Rakestraw out of Missouri is another guy. This guy is look, he's game, he's physical. He's going to get up in your shorts, 6 foot 170. He had that core injury that kept him out of the Senior Bowl. I don't know if he's going to work out at the Combine or not, but I really hope that he does, because I think he has a chance to end up being a first rounder. I've got him coming off the board early round 2. As of right now, going actually to, I want to say it was Arizona. If I look at my mock draft, yeah, Arizona number 35 overall. But he has a chance to end up coming off the board in round 1. Other corners, DJ James, he's one of the skinnier, slender build, however you want to call it. Those corners there coming out of Auburn. But again, I'm curious to see just how quick he is. 6 foot 185, started his career there at Oregon, and look, 5 interceptions, 24 pass breakups in his career. He's one to watch out for. Another guy that I would be curious about is going to be Cam Hart. I actually thought Cam Hart was going to be a safety, and I thought that was where they were going to play him at the Senior Bowl. But we saw some really nice change of direction. We saw his ability to stay with a lot of receivers. 6'2", 207. A veteran player there at Notre Dame. He's a guy that I continue to watch. He'll be a guy to keep an eye out for. How about Jarvis Brownlee out of Louisville? Now, Jarvis Brownlee is definitely an interesting one. He's 5'11", 179, but man, you wouldn't know it by the way he plays. He plays so much bigger than his size. 6 interceptions, 22 pass breakups in his career, but just put on the game film. Watch how physical he is. This guy's feisty, and I think teams love that feistiness. He's a guy that I think will end up coming off the board in round number 2. I think people weren't really talking about him there at Louisville. I think a lot of people were thinking about Quincy Riley, but Jarvis Brownlee, man, he's a guy that is going to be turning some heads. You look at TJ Tampa out of Iowa. Now, TJ Tampa is a bigger corner. TJ Tampa is a physical corner. Just how fluid of an athlete is TJ Tampa? The long speed. Is he going to be able to handle getting vertical with these guys? We know that he can be physical around the line of scrimmage. We know that he can, he's a willing tackler there and run support. He'll come up and he'll wrap you up. He'll hit you. But just how fluid of an athlete is he? I think he can end up coming off the board in round number 2, and a guy that can end up making an impact early on at the next level. Now, I think teams will probably also be looking for the next Juju Brents. Julius Juju Brents came out of Kansas State, 2nd round pick, number 44 overall a season ago. And when you look at him, you look at his stats, and the stats aren't going to blow you away. I think that's one of the things that people may get caught up in when they look at at the stats. They had him measured in at 6'4" and 204. 6.5 tackles for loss, 6 interceptions, including 4 in 2022, and then 10 pass breakups, right? So that's in his career. But the thing with it was you watched a lot of his matchups. He was a gamer. He was a guy that was, that never shied away from that competition, shied away from a top level wide receiver, and he stuck like glue. I mean, there were times where he did get beat, but he really worked hard and did a really good job down the stretch there for the Wildcats, showcasing the ball skills, showing his ability to go up and get the football. And at 6'2", and 3/4, 198 pounds at the combine. Ran a 4.5 340 with a 1.57 split, 41.5-inch vertical leap. Yeah, that got him drafted in round number 2. Ended up with 8 pass breakups in 8 starts for the Colts this past season. Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon is a guy that reminds me of him. 6'3", 197. You look at his stats, not mind-blowing at Alabama. Shows up at Oregon, 3 interceptions, 7 pass breakups. Similar size, but I think you watch the feistiness. There were some reps at the Senior Bowl where he was beaten. But, man, this guy has that competitive nature. You watch, really the biggest question is going to be that athleticism for a guy his size. If he can showcase some of that same talent, some of that same agility there that Juju Brents was able to showcase, then I think he's a guy that could end up surprising and get himself drafted a lot sooner than a lot of people are realizing. That short shuttle Juju Brents ran a 4.05. So you think about that. Where's Kyrie Jackson going to do, coming off the board there? So he's one of those guys that I think is going to be a fun watch for sure. Mikey Sainristil of Michigan, Chris Abrams-Drain of Missouri, Kalen King out of Penn State. These are all undersized corners. I think teams are going to be looking for that nickel. So these guys are going to be in that competition. Who's going to break away and be that alpha in that group? Elijah Jones out of Boston College is a guy that people aren't really talking about. Put on that Florida State tape, and you're going to see a guy that's shut down Keon Coleman. 6'2", 176, 5 interceptions this past season, 36 pass breakups in his career. Another guy who spent 6 years there at Boston College, but a guy that is one of those day 3 sleepers that's kind of flying under the radar. And then one last guy to mention is going to be Kamari Lassiter. I think this was a guy that I think for all the focus that had been on Kelly Ringo in 2022, it was Kamari Lassiter that was holding things down. And I thought he had another exceptional 2023 season. So he's a guy I think just checking the box off there to be a day 2 pick. And then when you're talking about the safeties, Cooper DeJean still battling the injury, obviously, so we won't see him work out. Is he a safety? Is he a corner? Would have loved to have seen him work out to really prove to everyone, what position he's going to be playing. He's a guy for me that is going to come off the board in round 1. The question is going to be exactly where he can come off the board to Jacksonville. I ultimately have him penciled in right now. Bear with me one sec. I need to get back to my mock draft and see exactly where I have Cooper DeJean. Cooper is... I have him number 20 to Pittsburgh. I think now with Pittsburgh doing what they're doing, releasing Mason Cole, I think that's shaping up to be Jackson Powers Johnson. But Cooper DeJean, if he's on the board when Philly's drafting at 22, Green Bay's drafting at 25, Tampa Bay at 26. Those are 3 teams that I think could definitely be on the market for a defensive back like Cooper DeJean. He's not getting out of round 1. There's no doubt about it. This is a guy that he's a stud. He's a playmaker. But the other safeties, I think really what you're going to be looking at is Cam Kinchens and Tyler Nubin. So Cam Kinchens, Tyler Nubin, I think this is going to be a fun race, and you're going to get to see the 2 of them. They're not too far off from the 2 of them, from each other, I should say. So when you look at Cam Kinchens, he's going to be DB 32. Tyler Nubin's going to be DB 42. So not too far off. And these are 2 guys that both have that range over the top, right? Kinchen's a little bit smaller, 5'11", 202, but packs a punch coming downhill. Again, like I said, has that sideline-to-sideline ability, has that range over the top, 11 interceptions, 15 pass breakups. He was a leader out there on the team, unquestioned leader of that secondary there for the Miami Hurricanes. And then when you talk about Tyler Nubin, look, he's big, he's physical, he's 6'2", 205, 13 interceptions, 11 pass breakups in his career. So He's just, he's a bigger version of Cam Kinchens, I think. I think Newman is, of the two, really both of these guys can end up coming off the board in round one. Green Bay, again, if they don't go Cooper to Gene, I think they could go with either one of these guys and be okay with it. I think ultimately, I think they fall to round two, but I think you're going to see, teams, the teams that I mentioned that could be on the market for Cooper to Gene. I could see them trading up to get their hands on one of these guys because they're day one starters, plug and play. You just want to see how fluid they are, and when you watch the safeties, you just want to see how fluid, the fluidity, how stiff are in the hips are they. When you watch, I think the best example was Taylor Mays. Taylor Mays, coming out of USC, was just this freakish, hulking safety / linebacker, just a giant dude, right? 6'3", 235 pounds. I mean, it was just insane how big this guy was. And when number two for the Trojans was coming after you, you took notice. At 230 pounds, runs a 4.4 340, 1.56 10-yard split, 41-inch vertical leap. Straight line speed like a mofo. I mean, that was one of the things that you definitely saw with him. Ended up being the second round, 49th pick overall. And 49ers ended up dealing him to the Bengals after the first year. He was there for a few years, saw some special teams play, and it was just the stiffness. He couldn't really drop into coverage. Couldn't cover the running backs, tight ends. It definitely couldn't line up over receivers. He would get torched, and so you got to watch the hip stiffness. That's really the big thing with a lot of these safeties. Are they going to be able to cover just because they have that straight line speed? Just how agile are they? What can they do? With some of these drills, especially with that change of direction, that's going to be huge. I think with Taylor Mays, you saw a 4.24 short shuttle, 6.98 3-cone drill. So when you're talking about some of these DBs, that was on the lower end. So just something to be mindful of as you're watching these guys. I think after that, you look at a guy like Javon Bullard, Kalen Bullock. They're going to be the next two guys likely to come off the board. Javon Bullard, we know that this guy can cover coming out of Georgia. He's a guy that can line up in the slot. He can play deep safety. If you wanted to play a little strong safety, he can do that as well. I think he has all those tools in his tool belt. So I think he's a second rounder. I'm looking at the Ravens potentially. That would be a nice fit. And then Kalen Bullock, he's 6'3", 180. Not very physical. But man, I watched that Cal game and the range. I think he was at the opposite hash and was able to, there was a deep ball, it was a go route to the opposite sideline, and he was able to get over the top of that route and pick off the pass. 9 interceptions, 15 pass breakups. This past season, I don't know how much of it was him and how much of it was just the defense was so poor and the linebackers that were giving up a lot. The DBs struggled for the Trojans as well. He just seemed to be out of position, seemed to be lost at times. But again, I don't know if it was so much it was him, that it was really that defense, and he was having to cover for a lot of those guys on the back end. I think the interviews I think will go a long way for Kalen Bullock for sure. Jaden Hicks, Washington State. A lot of length to this guy. He's 6'3", 6'4". Again, fluidity. We know that this guy can move sideline to sideline. Just want to be able to see him showcase that here at the Combine for sure. To really take notice there. Malik Mustafa out of Wake Forest isn't the biggest guy by any means, but he's a guy that's going to stick his nose in it right there in the middle of the defense. I love his physicality. I think showing off some of that athleticism to complement that will be something to watch out for. Keaton Oladapo out of Oregon State. I think he's really a solid player. I thought he played very well for the Beavers. A guy that 6'1", 209. really made his presence felt starting in 2021. 3 straight years there at OSU, 23 pass breakups, 3 interceptions. A guy that was right around 70 tackles a year, 15 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. Did a little bit of everything for OSU. I think there's a lot of talk about the corners, the nickel. A lot of different players on the defensive side of the football, but really that constant on the back end of the defense was Quinyon Oladapo. 28, I thought, was really the guy that stirred the drink there on the back end of that defense for the Beavers. So, I'm looking to hopefully see a big day out of him. Dadrion Taylor Demerson, I think he's really introduced himself to the world with his performance there at the East-West Shrine game. He's just seemed to always be around the football, always seemed to be making plays on the ball, and it finally got people to recognize what a good freaking player this guy was at Texas Tech. 7 interceptions, 13 pass breakups, 7 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 147 total tackles, but it's his ability to line up in a lot of different positions. He could line up in the slot, cover guys. I think he could probably line up on the outside a little bit, play over the top, play him in the box if you need him to as well. Very versatile, and a guy that I think round 4 is probably about as far as he gets in this year's draft. James Williams out of Miami, another guy that's definitely interesting. He's big. He actually lined up, I think he was listed as a linebacker at the Senior Bowl. 6'5", 224 pounds, and a guy that's going to come with bad intentions. Again, you're going to have to watch that stiffness, because look, he's a big dude. I understand him coming downhill, makes a lot of plays that way, but man, if he's too stiff in the hips, if you're going to keep him at safety, it just, I have flashbacks of Taylor Mays. He was one of my, and I'm bummed about it because Taylor Mays was one of my favorite players in college to watch, because he was just a heat-seeking missile, was flying around. A dude that big should not move that fast. But that stiffness really caught up to him. Jalen Simpson out of Auburn, I think you're going to see a fluid athlete there, a guy that can cover. He played a little bit there at corner, I want to say. Tyke Smith out of Georgia, started his career at West Virginia, moved to Georgia, transferred there, and he's another guy that I think can play a lot of different positions on the back end of the defense. So he'll be another safety to keep an eye on in the middle rounds of the draft. And so he'll be a guy that I'm definitely looking forward to seeing work out. And then Bo Braid, I watched him at the Combine get absolutely torched on an out route. So I think that fluidity for him is another guy that really want to see what that looks like. And then the Utah guys. Cole Bishop, I actually thought he looked pretty good at the Senior Bowl covering tight ends. He's one of those guys that I think he can play around the box a little bit if you want him to. Excellent in coverage. He's a guy that I think could come off the board a lot higher than people are going to expect. And then Sione Vaki out of Utah. Still learning the safety position. I think he's a guy that's going to come off the board day 3 as a developmental prospect. Look, he had over 300 yards as a running back as well. But a guy that is a thumper. That he's going to be physical, he's going to be tough, and you want to have those guys on your roster. I think he'll be a special teams ace as well. Just a guy that's going to keep that feather in his cap, do a little bit of everything. So he'll be another guy that I think you'll be excited to watch work out. Guys that weren't invited, there were quite a few on this list. Mark Perry out of TCU, former, I want to say 100-meter champ. He's a bigger safety than Nook Bradford, who did get the invite. Bradford, a little bit better athlete, maybe. Mark Perry has more of that straight line speed. So I would have wanted to really verify some of that stiffness there with Perry. But look, I've seen him on go routes, run right with the receiver, and make a play on the football, attacking the catch point. Jarius Monroe out of Marshall, corner, played really well the last 2 seasons there at Tulane. 6 interceptions, 18 pass breakups. He's a taller corner as well. Really a surprise that he wasn't invited. Kenny Logan Jr. out of Kansas. This guy was the leader of the back end of that defense. This was a defense that continued to get better under Lance Leipold, and Kenny Logan was the guy that really held everything together. 6 foot 195, versatile, played both corner and safety for the Jayhawks. A guy that can play in the box for you. Had 7 tackles for loss this past season, 20 pass breakups, 6 interceptions, nearly 400 tackles in his 5 years playing there in Lawrence, Kansas. Just one of those guys that I think could find himself drafted late on day 3, and a guy that could stick at the next level. Beanie Bishop out of West Virginia. Man, this guy had, I think, 20 pass breakups, 4 interceptions, but he dropped a lot of interceptions and should have had many more to his name. But again, Beanie Bishop's the guy that I think teams are going to be interested in because of the ball skills. Even if he doesn't haul those passes in, he's around the football where he needs to be. So I was kind of surprised that he wasn't invited. So those were probably the biggest names. There's Quantez Stiggers out of Toronto Argonauts, the CFL, 7-on-7 guy there in Canada, and ended up playing in the CFL. Looked pretty good there at the East-West Shrine game. I think he's going to be a developmental guy. Trey Taylor out of Air Force, Jim Thorpe Award winner, wasn't even invited to the Combine. I think, isn't that something that just should happen anyway? If you win an award, you get invited to the Combine by default, just to showcase what you got. So a little bit of a surprise, minor surprise there that he wasn't invited, but I think at the end of the day, there's 66 DBs in this group, and I think there are a lot of guys to get excited about for the Combine. Now, I did say that the tight ends were also going to be there on Friday, but for one, we're out of time. But secondly, we'll cover them with the offense in the next podcast. I'll put another one together here in the next day or two in advance of the weekend so that we can go ahead and get into all the offensive players. And look, we've got more offensive players to talk about. There's 168 in the Combine over those last 2 days. 6 on special teams as well. We'll make sure to give them love as well. I think Torrey Taylor is worth the price of admission in and of itself. So we'll attack that, get back at it, and just make sure that you do tune in NFL Network Thursday, February 29th through Sunday, March the 3rd. I think it's going to be a heck of a lot of fun to watch all these guys work out. And yeah, I think that's about it for now. So until next time, everyone, for ReadyForTheDraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Take care, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week. And until next time, I am out of here.